Hello, my name is Michelle Singer. I'm the Adult Programs Coordinator for the Kellogg-Hubbard Library. My first little piece of housekeeping is to ask everyone to put themselves on mute and to stay on mute for the reading so that we cut down on background noise for our readers. I'm so happy you're all here. People are going to keep rolling in. This is a full house tonight, and I'm so glad because it's National Poetry Month, and it's been a wonderful month, and it's not slowing down. We're not tired of poetry, and that's such a fantastic thing. So the Kellogg-Hubbard Library is the sponsor for Poem City, and Poem City is the celebration of National Poetry Month. We put hundreds of poems in downtown windows in Montpelier. We host workshops and readings like tonight, and we couldn't do it without the support of the National Life Group Foundation, the Vermont Humanities Council, the Poetry Society of Vermont, Hunger Mountain Co-op, and VCFA. They are our sponsors, and part of why we're here tonight. So I want to thank them. So we have three wonderful poets here tonight. I'm so happy to have them doing a reading on Elegy, Poems of Loss and Hope. And again, welcome. And we're so glad to have you here. I am recording this reading. So if you know someone who couldn't be here and desperately wants to see this reading, they will be able to, or if you yourself want to go back and see it again, it's going to live on YouTube. The Kellogg-Hubbard Library has a YouTube channel. We also have a Poem City website or page on the Kellogg-Hubbard Library website, and we put all the programs. So anything that has happened for Poem City that you wish you saw, all the YouTube videos are on that Poem City page on the Kellogg-Hubbard Library website. And that's where you can find this reading after we're done as well. It takes me a day or two. So we are going to stay on mute. And if you have questions for our readers, please put them in the chat. We will also open up at the end of the reading for you to ask questions yourselves if you'd like to. So we're going to kick off tonight. I want to give as much time as possible to our poets to read. Our first poet reading tonight is Tim Carver. Tim Carver is the author of Remains, published in 2020. He graduated from Syracuse University's MFA program and teaches creative writing and rhetoric in his community. We are so happy to have him speak with us tonight, and welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm very excited to be reading for a lot of new folks. We were chatting before this started. I used to go to the Kellogg-Hubbard Library a few times with Jeff Hewitt when I was in high school. So I'm really excited to be part of Poem City. I am excited to see the names of a few of my students who are in the audience right now. And I really am looking forward to some high quality heckling during the Q&A portion of the night. I'm gonna go ahead and read. Trying to start a timer so I don't go over. Okay. I'm gonna read from Remains, which is my first book here. And it's about the life and death of my mother, who died in a rather bizarre car accident in 1995 on the toll road in Mount Mansfield. And the book is a real collaboration between well, a lot of people, but my sister Clara helped design the book and included a number of art pieces that are mixed in with the poems. And so the poems and the collages were made from a lot of different materials that I've collected over the years: letters, photographs, transcripts. I interviewed quite a number of people who knew her, and part of the process was just tracking down her friend from third grade who used to live in Vermont and moved. And I live in central New York now with my partner, so I'm actually closer to a few of them. So it's been nice to reconnect. This project has been a project of reconnecting in a real sense. So I'm going to read a few poems from the beginning of the book, a few from the middle, a few from the end. This poem is called The Translucent Bell, and it starts off the book. The Translucent Bell. When her body, trapped beneath the car, fell still, when the walls of her suffering softened and cleared, what passed through her was not exactly a tongue, not exactly a tune, but it rang, if you can call what it did ringing, and bore her up, held her in what you could call arms, and bade her look upon the scene, the desperation with which he threw himself to the ground, the harm he did then to the earth with his hands and voice to dig her out. But it wasn't until she saw the children sitting by the road that what had fluttered in her body finally spoke, not exactly a song or a moan, but a distant flung sound. This poem is called They Came Wearing the Bodies of Children. Immediately they came to clear the scene, wearing the bodies and gestures of children. First, they gathered around her husband and carried him off in pieces, starting with his face, then his legs and arms like heavy furniture. Then they knelt beside her own children and wiped their faces, scrubbed away the colors and edges of their mouths, their understanding of what they'd seen, until they were featureless and smooth and she could not recognize them. Then they carried off the trees, the wrecked car, the few scattered and motionless birds, carried off the mountain and sky until the world was empty. Then they turned to her, loosened the front of her body, coaxed her out, and when they asked her how she felt, she smiled, though she couldn't just then remember why. This poem is called This Was the Body. She did not have time to miss her body, but looking back at it now, realized how really lovely it was, how capable and completely hers it had always been. This was the body she had as a child, muddied and awkward, the same one she used to answer the phone. This was the body that said yes, the same that leaned into a kiss and gave birth to her kids. She had not thought it was possible to miss such a thing. She had always thought that to miss somehow required a body, that it was the body that made one capable of loss. But then she saw herself far below, saw how calmly she had been arranged, how much she resembled the lake she swam in as a young girl, and she could see down there all those other bodies she missed, huddled together, leaning into the wind along her shore. Painted flowers, clouds. A room, in the bare sense, is a discrimination of form. Her name, a shadow saying throws across the wall. And does it not follow, like a hallway, that her moments are all contiguous and window out into a quiet evening? She pushes on them, and they swing away. She's back again on that old couch with the tiny green flowers, sun texturing down through the glass, listening to her daughter read into a tape recorder, watching as she mouths the words. How do you work this? Come show mom how you turn it off. A room in its bare skin is a usefulness, well illumined, lived in, as is a body, form with an argument to make. And in her last moment, when the door opened and did a flat violence to her room, when we stood in her unfinished frame, weren't we confusing the inside with the outside? I'm going to skip a little to the middle part of the book. This poem is called Collision Analysis. Maybe you were only 12 and dangling your feet off the bed when you knew you would die at 36, when you were forced to watch it happen through the branches of your fingers. Maybe you recognized the woman who ran behind the car when it rolled back. There is only speculation at this point, but somewhere along the line, you took your paints out from under your bed and opened an investigation into color. You began compiling evidence against yourself, furious to prove that you had not wasted your life. Was this why you wanted a bandsaw for your birthday? Why you taught yourself to retile the bathroom? Why you were always bumping into friends on the street? Because you knew you didn't have time. And why wait when the world was liable to shift out of gear? The police report said that mechanical defects were not a causal factor in the accident. But now I'm just trying to reopen an old case and to render a clear impression of how to figure the entire emotional breadth of a flower. So she was a painter, among other things. And I learned through talking with people how much she actually did all the time, and it was quite incredible to learn everything. But she was a wonderful impressionist painter. And this poem is a little bit more about that. This poem is called Pressure Systems. The thought crossed your mind, scattering like flakes in a sudden agitation of air. How relentless and fleeting the seconds that fall from the sky. When you painted, you felt your mind drift, felt the sky slip by overhead. What was the name of the hill where the kids went sledding? The one by the hospital. When it snows, it falls, it tells the truth. Dave was outside in the driveway, shouldering the cold. He'd agreed to take them, which meant you could stay home. Your mind, a softening square of attention. A translucent room whose walls were always changing color. You leaned out of the window for just a few seconds and the entire room went blank. You called out to Dave, the kids, they're getting their stuff on. They'll be right down. They'll be all right. So in three different points in this book, there are longer poems, which I'm not going to read because of the limited time. But I don't know why I mentioned them if I'm not going to read them. They're there. This next poem is called High Pollen. Returning a plate of melon to the fridge, leaning back in the lawn chair, eyes shut, body tingling from heat, kids playing under the gnarled crabapple. Why don't these also happen for a reason? The way your friend who calls says the bone cancer is happening to her. Miracles thicken the air like pollen. Remarkable how that works. No need to rationalize a little chilled cantaloupe on a hot day, while your friend rapidly accelerates toward her final convergence with the plan. These days, the ones who remember us always fail to remember. These are the most unharmed by time. Better to wait until whatever happens does. A nap as close to God as one can get. I will read 2 more poems. Is that okay? I think that's just about the time I have. I'm going to skip immediately to my favorite poems. This poem is called Continual Compound Interest. There is nothing remarkable about this photograph of my father, smiling, standing on the corner of Willard and Maple, wearing his college graduation robes, shouldering the weight of a gray sky. Nothing, except that he is by himself, wearing his wedding ring around his neck, and that tomorrow would have been her birthday. There is nothing in any degree that could have prepared him for this sudden bankruptcy. Nor are there any lines in chess that could have protected him, though he followed them all to their conclusions. No experiment will ever yield an explanation. There are no particles of love, no waves of grief, though it does flood down and out of him in the kitchen 20 years later, faintly, like radon through the heart's gold foil. This is the last poem that I will read. Thank you so much to all you party animals to come out and listen to a whole bunch of elegies tonight. Like, you sad people. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. A wish's tender air. He loves me as the sound of a flower. Somewhere right now, a single truth is staring out at you, he loves me not. Throw yourself down in the field, he loves me. From right here, the sky is wider and really does contain everything, he really does. This time of year is not so cruel. Not knowing is cruel, he loves me not. Lying in a field of choices, tilting in the sun, is cruel. How does a flower know he loves me? Out of an entire field of mistakes, he loves me not. How does a flower know the truth, he loves me? All the field's ears perk up, he loves me. How exactly does a wish work? First, it must be whispered, he loves me, and then once all the petals are off, a wind will come, he loves me, and you will float away, and the world, he loves me, and the birds, all the soft white birds will be below you. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you so much for sharing that. Our next reader tonight is Stephen Cramer. Stephen Cramer is the author of 6 poetry collections, most recently Listen, published in 2020, and Clangings, published in 2012. He founded and currently teaches in the low residency MFA program in creative writing at Lesley University. Stephen, it's a pleasure to have you here with us tonight.
Thank you, Michelle. And I want to say thank you, Michelle, for what you've done in putting together what must have been a very challenging Poem City. You hadn't done another virtual one. This was the first, I believe, right?
Last year we did some, but not quite like this.
Right. It's just, it has a certain Woodstockian, we're a effing city, man. It's really that good. And I'm really delighted to be part of it. Thank you all for coming, although in a way, in this kind of context, thank you all for being, might make more sense. Elegy, loss, hope. The elegy and the loss, no prob. The hope gave me a little bit of a challenge. I'd like to think the last poem I'm going to read, which is an elegy, also has a sort of crosswind of hope. A thematic reading, one of the things that gives you an opportunity to do is to look back at more than just your most recent work and see how there may be poems that, work of yours that contributes to this, this thematic cluster. And so I'm going to read from 3 different books before I read a new poem. And I'm going to start with a poem from my 3rd book, Dialogue for the Left and Right Hand. Anybody who's had their wedding either photographed or videoed knows that the album or the video starts to record losses as much as connections as it ages. It's kind of I guess there's a certain sort of Dorian Gray effect to it. And if you take the time to look back on these a wedding album, you'll see more and more, obviously, people lost, but also relationships that are no more. And it's an incredibly poignant paradox. This poem is called The Ghost in the Wedding Photograph. The I in the voice, the speaker, is definitely not me. I guess I'm being talked to. There's a word, scumble, and that is that denotes that experience when you write over something, you write something and your palm blurs it more or less as you're writing it. Okay, I don't yet know whether the glass is on or off these days. The ghost in the wedding photograph. Whenever there's an emptiness to fill, look for me, devoid, concave, or hollow like a flute. If you find me, I'll sigh, not out of melancholy, not from desire, but as a kettle's whirl of vapor sighs, an axle winds, an oar groans across the lake. Losing me, you'll lose your sense of touch. Although you can't conceive my face or remember much about my birth, I'm not just a surface to disturb. In the cool ache as your wrist refracts, in a scumble of unreadable notes, in a name that abrades when you say it. Too often you misspeak me and turn shy, a child who runs to a parent and hugs a stranger's knees. Once placid, I'm active. Once a paper cup, once a trickle of water, now I'm thirst. But first, I'm yearning, then yearning's aftertaste. You never see the amaryllis lean toward the light. Remember, when you're tempted to explain, how contentment has made you rational. Yes, you, lined up with your relatives, squinting from the shade of an American elm, I'm the one behind you at the river's edge who looks like you, who waves from the far bank. Anybody who writes knows that memories find their way into your work in extremely sly and covert ways. That image of running and hugging a stranger's knees. When I was, I don't know, 6, I ran out into a park across the street because I thought the woman whose back to me was my mother, and hugged her knees, and she looked down and it was a stranger. And that was still a memory that has found its place, but this shock I can still, in some ways, experience. I'm going to read the title poem from my 4th collection, Goodbye to the Orchard. And a friend of mine is here. It's also, actually, there are quite a number of people, some of them with my name, who are here, and that's kind of disorienting. But also, one person here, a colleague of mine named Rachel Manley, introduced me to a poet, a Caribbean poet, the late Wayne Brown, who was a truly major writer and transcendent mind and heart. This poem, Goodbye to the Orchard, Wayne liked, which was not a frequent experience. And he liked it enough to actually have his own private students memorize it. So I'd like to dedicate it to Wayne and Rachel, who goes by my name on the screen tonight. Why it's an elegy, I think it dramatizes, narrates somewhat briefly one of the oldest losses, as I think you'll understand when you hear it. Samuel Johnson said about Paradise Lost, no one would wish it longer. So this was my own little nervy attempt to say it more quickly. Goodbye to the orchard. Beautiful from the get-go. We were incarnations of the new and pure sex. I'll miss that along with the unicorns. The organic bower of our garden grew into anybody's memory of a bed or a mattress in a shack near a lake. Mistakes, like love, are to be made, you said. I hadn't thought of that. That first autumn was easy. The liquor of decay headiest at noon, and the orchard, let's face it, had begun to resemble a casino, all its tables rigged in our favor. The yoke of being cared for is what cast us out, not that immense, bearded librarian, our curator, and not our having learned how to get on one another's nerves. Goodbye to the orchard. Green one day, next day, blood. We know to stiffen at a voice, how to tell the truth from an untruth, what's sweet, what stinks. Behind each sleeping dog, another to let lie. Who knew an innocence that took ages to perfect could fall so short when time came to live? You knew, and then you let me know. All right, I'm going to stop bantering because I timed my reading and it came in 11 seconds under 15 minutes. But I even practiced some banter. But clearly I'm talking too much in between poems because I see time's wasting. This is called Everyone Who Left Us. It is a pantoum. A pantoum is in quatrains. 2 lines from quatrain 1 must be repeated in quatrain 2. And those 2 new lines have to be repeated in the next quatrain. And that goes on and on and on and on until you want to kill yourself. And then just when you want to kill yourself, you have to use the 2 lines that you didn't use in the first quatrain in the last quatrain. Once you finish it, the structure cannot be revised. The lines can obviously be revised, but you cannot add or subtract. It's a remarkable cul-de-sac of an aesthetic experience. Everyone who left us. Everyone who left us, we find everywhere. It's easier now to look them in the eyes, at grave sites, in bed, when the phone rings. Of course, we wonder if they think of us. It's easier now to look them in the eyes. Imagine touching a hand, listening to them talk. Of course, we wonder if they think of us when nights like tonight turn salty, warm. Imagine touching a hand, listening to them talk. Hard to believe they're capable of such coldness. When nights like tonight turn salty, warm, we think of calling them, leaving messages. Hard to believe they're capable of such coldness. No color, no pulse, not even a nerve reaction. We think of calling them, leaving messages vivid with news we're sure they'd want to know. No color, no pulse, not even a nerve reaction. We close our eyes in order not to see them. Vivid with news, we're sure they'd want to know. We don't blame them, really. They weren't cruel. We close our eyes in order not to see them reading, making love, or falling asleep. We don't blame them, really. They weren't cruel, though it hurts every time we think of them reading, making love, or falling asleep, enjoying the usual pleasures and boredoms, though it hurts every time we think of them like a taste we can't swallow, their names stay. Enjoying the usual pleasures and boredoms, then, they leave us the look of their faces like a taste we can't swallow. Their names stay, diminishing our own, getting in the way at grave sites, in bed, when the phone rings. Everyone who left us we find everywhere, then they leave us. The look of their faces diminishing, our own getting in the way. Two more poems, which I hope I have time for. This is called Elegy to My Family. I was working on a long poem over a period of about almost 2 decades. My family lost a member of the family every 3 years. Somebody said, what is that poem form called? A pantoum. I wrote a great number of elegies for them, for the individual members, and I thought I was going to write a long poem in which each one of them got a section, and I couldn't do it. But lines from that poem ended up in this poem called Elegy to My Family. Quickly, the Anzio Beach off the Tyrrhenian Sea is where the Allies landed to invade Italy in World War II. My father's twin brother died in the landing. Bachelard, Gaston Bachelard wrote The Poetics of Space. The Hungry Eye was a folk club. Martin D18 is a guitar. Everybody knows who the Kingston Trio were, I hope, and that's Richard Tucker was a very well-known opera singer in the 50s and 60s, maybe even 40s. Elegy to My Family. I'm sorry I'm speeding. Elegy to My Family. My middle name, my middle name is Alfred. Elegy to my family. My middle name went down in the Tyrrhenian off Anzio Beach, life jacket filling with the sea. After that, my father, split in half, would sing into the bathroom mirror where his twin lived. After she died, we found poems my mother wrote to her 5 dogs, each killed by a neighbor's car. You do what you have to do was a motto she loved saying over and over. Her tailor's dummy buxom amputee lived in the attic. The attic, said Bachelard, denotes the rational mind, but the basement's where I find my brother, back from the hungry eye, strumming his Martin D18. He came of age in the era of the pocket radio, the Kingston Trio, and public swimming pools that polio closed. Era when the sky might catch fire. To improve us, my aunt read Uncensored Grimm. Rumpelstiltskin danced until he tore himself in two. She wrote to Richard Tucker, and he wrote back twice and sang Verdi from a boombox in hospice. In a dream, I hold my sister's hand. A walk, yes, a walk would be good. New moon, poplars circle the duck pond. New Jersey church spires blacker than the black sky. What I tell her wakes me up. Then finally, this is the hope poem. And I won't gloss the references. I love references. I won't gloss them, but I hope they are evocative anyway. It's called Elegy for Little Richard. Saturi can surge upon you in the subway, lectured Dr. Tufale in Intro Zen. The mire gives us the very substance of art, goes Lorca's play and theory of the duende. A wop bop, a loo bop, a wop bam boom, reflected Little Richard in a Macon Greyhound Terminal's greasy spoon, up to his biceps in Georgia suds, boss man piling on pot atop pot atop pot. And that's exactly what I meant at the time. Of the two strains of modesty, false and true, he knew neither. I put that little thing in it, he said, of Little Richard's boogie, gospelized flop, in no way tutti frutti, green as air before a downpour. Always had that thing, but didn't know what to do with that thing I had. For consistency, he'd win the Whitman Contradiction Prize. Gay? I founded gay. I wore makeup and eyelashes when no men were. But once a chartered flight caught fire in a dream, Jesus Christ made men men, women women, sermoned minister Richard Penniman. Saturi, duende, daemon versus demon. One draws from light, the other swills in beer stink at the Star Club, Hamburg, 1961. He didn't open for the Beatles opened for him. Backstage, he'd preach from Revelations. We'd all sit around and listen just to hear him talk, remembered Lennon, whose dying monosyllable, yeah, I'll never not recall, down to the low-sized radio the news dirged through. I call that time my decade-long lost weekend. His own one and only. For years, an ancient star I didn't know wasn't dead. In fact, it was the Fab's blandish cover of his long, tall Sally that schooled the Beatle demonic white mass of us. Don't sit so still. Sex sings best in tongues, if not yet drag. Truth's not only beauty, but raw joy.
Thank you, Stephen.
Looks like 15 minutes. I don't know.
Thank you. Our last speaker tonight is Tom Schmidt. Tom Schmidt has published 2 poetry chapbooks, Enough to Drink or Drown in 2020, and Like a Metaphor, forthcoming in 2021. He received a PhD from Cambridge University and taught humanities for 30 years in California, Oregon, and Vermont. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you. And thank you, Zoomies far and wide, familiar faces and new ones. I begin with a blank verse poem I wrote several years after the death of my only child. It is a bit long at 5 minutes, but I think it's my truest statement about loss and hope. The ant. Consider, if you will, the humble ant. Our species loves to laud its industry, persistence, instinct to cooperate, fine morals metaphorical for all, unless perhaps one chooses to observe, as I did, sitting in the sunny sand beneath a bluff, the outer edge of which was crumbling to the beach, the inner part containing 40 feet above my head, the coffin of my dead, a single ant. Intrepid pilgrim on 3 pairs of legs, he wandered on the mighty 4-inch dunes until he found a whitish fragment of some detritus of death the sea had cast upon the tide line's edge the night before. The breaker's warning with what must have been a roar in ears so small, 10 feet away, now 9, now 8, and with each set of waves another foot. The tide was creeping in. Our hero, all oblivious to this, maintained his grip on his reality. Transfixed, I bent my beam of intellect upon my little subject's eschaton. Around a small depression in the sand 2 inches deep, he bore his bit of stuff up to the lip almost, then down again across the little pit, and once again he climbed the other side and almost out, then down, across again, and so it went, while all the while the tide crept up the sand. I did not intervene. How quick the ant, but quicker still the sand, and quick enough the tide, together slowed to parable for me, a little death to edify. Thus nature drowns the innocent with help from careless men, so God can make a point to aid the father of a drowned child. As if he needed practice with cliches. I only loaned her to you for a little while. Such tests I give to those I love the most. She's saved from all the hardship of this life. Such nonsense on and on ad nauseum. What is the point? The point is only this. There is no point, but people simply die like ants, one at a time, by accident, some daughters, some in icy creeks, and all too young, too soon, too suddenly, too late. They do not leave behind a tidy God with reasons for the innocents he kills. No, not the God who lurks behind the stars, whose dust and ashes settle onto Job. The one who does not answer, but still is, whose enigmatic smile fades in and out of dreams, imaginations, theories, lies, whose eyes, if they appear to us at all, will not do so in mirrors or in smoke. Hear this, my Summa Theologica. God does not fix, God never will explain in this life or the next a single pain. Into each lifted palm falls only rain, enough to drink or drown, praise or complain. There. God works in, not for, much less against each sparrow fall, each feather floating free for eyes that see. No consolation here, unless imagined, held in metaphor, embraced in faith too simple for the world. Beyond our rainbows of complexity, refracting fractions, droplets only, vain attempts to justify the ways of God, whose means by no means end in pots of gold, but rather ashes, gray and crumbling, soft, infusing all the air. This grace of death drifts down, almost unseen, becomes the earth. Who sees? Who sees? And who invites the rain, invades the seed, invades again the fallow souls whose weary eyes are fixed on distances from which no visions come. Enough, the ant. Enough, the dust, the rain. On a lighter note, something about light, which shone into the cancer lounge where I sat with my mortality last summer until the results came back with an all clear. Light on light. Since few words rhyme with hematology and no one likes the theme theology, it looks like I will have to bury death in clever couplets while I still have breath to gasp a few iambic lines of verse that tend to end in hearse or curse or worse. Lymphoma, chemo, sterile waiting room bereft of people, not as you assume the breathing kind, the magazine, I mean, an early victim of the quarantine, removed for COVID lest the patients linger and touch infected photos of some singer whose heart was broken by a famous actor. But I digress, except the heart part, factor as it is in all our tragic plights, pursued by paparazzi, lymphocytes, or if by reason of good luck and genes, we end up in the same black limousines much later, but without the sad cliches about courageous battles. Yes, it pays, surviving into geriatric slumber. The glad cliche of age is just a number inscribed on your 100th birthday card, while family hold you in high regard, hunched over, staring at some tepid stew that you're too old to smell or taste or chew. But here's the thing. Why even one more day in such a state will easily outweigh the weightlessness of the alternative. Why every metered heart so longs to live, to greet another morning with its rhyme. For light. Through all the ravages of time, since microscopic entities first turned toward the sun and in its glowing learned what emanating force of life was there, from single cells to apes without much hair, like me, from birth through each vicissitude until this one, from which I'll soon conclude, we've all been orienting to this star, which, shining in the east beyond us far, leads to each holy child, and so much more. A path of moonlight reaching from the shore, the diamond glitter on new fallen snow, beloved faces warmed by fire glow. If these are trite or sentimental lines, make up some of your own. Whatever shines, glows, glimmers, or illuminates will do. The point is, living is a point of view. My end is near enough, but I'm not frightened, much less profound, although perhaps enlightened. If only what I see is what I get, I'll take it gladly to my last sunset. The following poem, which kind of wants to be a song, was inspired by two couples I never met and who, as far as I know, never met each other, down in a hollow on Center Road. One couple elderly, one young, successive occupants of the same house. Living things. Once upon a time, a story I didn't read but loved the cover, a farmhouse draped in morning glory, inside, a dreamer and a lover, whose garden heard the sparrows sing. They made a lovely living thing. Together from their front porch chairs, or shuffling on the road, they waved at passers-by like me, whose stares took in a life I might have craved if glimpses from a passing car could fathom what they were and are. They aged as living things will do. First, she took to a wheelchair, rolled along by feeble arms a year or two, alone then, until his bell tolled. Neglected garden beds grew weeds. But loss is not where this tale leads. For house and garden stood forlorn but 2 years. Then one day my eyes were drawn to garden plot reborn. Neat rows of someone's enterprise, a swing set, a repainted shed, new blossoms in each flower bed. To bless invites a mystery regarding people, what or who makes them and ties their history to sparrow songs and morning dew, and what they leave behind, a trace of circles, garden soil, and grace. The next one is written in memory of my stepmother and in memory of me a bit prematurely. Click. When Margie died, we found her stuffed in drawers of menus, matchbooks, holiday brochures, unlabeled photographs, antique receipts, and journals full of travel notes and weather. We took 3 days to winnow, and the wheat not near enough to make a loaf. The chaff, 6 body bags, plastic shoved down the chute, and that was it. Effectively erased, a vestige barely clings to our recall of all those hoarded things that weren't quite her, but tangible, could hold her in the dark until she and her secrets slipped away. She came of age with dust bowls, and the war returned her first love in a telegram. My generation countered its depression at pharmacies, unfolding TV trays to watch the breaking news of distant wars. In only 8 years since her death, I've learned the best intelligence is artificial, the rest accessible inside my phone. From this new world, I'll bravely sail away, just PDFs and Word files in my wake. I'll leave no box-encumbered stepchildren. A click or two will render digital my legacy. So many megabytes held in the cloud, my temporary shroud, until a finger renders me complete by tapping first, select all, then delete. Finally, a poem that takes its title and last line from Hamlet's affirmation of life's mysteries, about the lifelong project of finding simplicity on the other side of complexity. You asked everyone and me, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I paused from play to respond. Later, while I accumulated degrees, you asked, what are you going to do with that? And I robed myself in answers. I didn't hear from you for a long time, or maybe you were that hum I thought was an appliance always on in the background, or maybe I was. Anyway, years later, we met at a party, held up our wine glasses like little shields, and you asked, what do you do? And I told you, it was easy. Then, after I had done most of what I was going to do and lost most of what mattered, you maintained a polite distance, but your eyes still asked. So I went back to doing more of it. Now I'm done. So of course you turn up again to ask, what are you going to do? This. I am going to follow the flight of a bee from hive to flowered branch, where I will watch an apple grow that I will bake into a pie, sweetened with honey from the hive. I'm going to learn the news from Isaiah and Blake and Milosh in time. I'm going to consider water as it moves over stones, and stones as they do not move underwater. I am going to watch lines deepen, the lines on her face, the lines under the names of things, more things than are dreamt of. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you to all our poets tonight. We have 5 to 10 minutes open for questions. If anyone would like to put a question in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself, you're welcome to pose a question to one of our readers or all of them. I can ask the obvious question, which is, why is poetry the right language for loss? To get us started.
Want to take that? Tom, Tim? I mean, I have an answer, but I don't think I should need, I don't feel like I necessarily should go first.
The only thing I can say of Selena Moore is it's very hard to say more when you hear such deep stuff. I mean, there's no more words. I'm just so impressed by all of you. Just beautiful.
Thank you so much.
How could I say anything better than what you've already said? But anyway, that's where I am. I think that's why there's so much silence.
It's an interesting dynamic because I don't know what Tim and Tom feel, but I almost like talking about poetry as much as writing it or reading it. And the almost is important, but so is the as much. This is really not an answer to your question, Michelle, but there is a way in which the most individual, I think, and maybe private and maybe lonely of art forms, if talked about, actually unites people in a pretty unique way. And that's just sort of a response to whoever made that lovely comment that, you know, it so rewards one's paying it attention that you got to say, I read this.
I think I would add, yeah, thank you, Stephen. I think the private and lonely art, certainly. Michelle, it was about loss, right? The question.
You
Right.
can answer however you like. You can talk about, yes, but
yeah, my thoughts about it are that there's a few poems in the book that are a little bit longer and feel at times like an essay, and I'm thinking like an exploration or trying to answer something. And I think of poems as doing something different from an essay. And I think that's what makes poetry a little more suited for loss, because it's not something that you can rationalize all the time or explain away. It's just something that you kind of have to wrestle with. It's like something that you're not going to be able to resolve perhaps for your entire life. And I feel like that's a little closer to the work of poetry for me than analysis or something like that. So I think, yeah, poetry deals with or can deal with things that you can't resolve. Maybe.
When I had just finished college and knew almost nothing of loss, I was reading through the Norton Anthology of Literature, those big 2,500 page tomes, and I came across the poem by William Wordsworth, Surprised by Joy, about the loss of his daughter. And I was so struck by it, I memorized it. And who would know, 20 years later, almost to the day, I would lose my own daughter. I think the first experience signals me as someone who is hardwired to find meaning in words, and especially the word pictures the beauty, the metaphor of poetry, and to try to find those words for myself is part of that appreciation.
If I can just add one thing, Michelle, I feel your question, I feel like my mentor, the late Donald Justice, must have been overhearing your question, because somebody did once ask him something as large as what's the purpose of art. It may have been what's the purpose of poetry. He said, to record what might otherwise be lost. And the simplicity of that and the profundity of that scene it just feels like years and decades ago, he answered the question you asked tonight.
I'm writing it down. Thank you. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
Yes, I wanted to ask a question of Tim. So on the page, your prose poems, the shorter ones, on the page, as people were talking tonight about how loss is hard to express, to get words for. And on the page, there are gaps, there are spaces between language. And I know we've talked about associations, we've talked about the unspeakable, and I wonder if there's something in those spaces between where language, it just won't do.
Yeah, thanks, Eleanor. What Eleanor is referring to is in the prose poem, there's maybe if that is
Yes.
Helpful at all
Yes.
for folks. I was trying to, the spaces mean different things to me in different poems, but part of it is a way that I want to get an effect of a line break in something like a block of prose. Certain moments where there is a relationship between the words that I want to draw attention to, and create a little bit more of space for. That's kind of a formal answer, but I also think of those gaps as a reference to her painting, and the maybe moments of an unfinished poem or an unfinished impression, or an impressionist painting, which is what she would do. These gaps or blurs or smudges of something that is trying to be very clear.
Is it okay to respond to a question that wasn't directed to me? I won't if it isn't, because I just want to, Tim's notion of how the effect of white space or gaps or different line breaks, you can, my experience is you can sense the multiplicity of effects, but it's very hard to articulate them and pin them down. Poetry, by and large, is written in lines. And that's why poets are better than prose writers. If anyone wanted to know why that's the case, it's because we get, I'm kidding, Lori and Rachel and anyone else that writes prose, but to be able to take the syntax and use it in a way that either isolates or in other ways transforms diction, rhythm by virtue of the use of the line, whether it's metrical or free verse, is a key element of the craft of writing poetry. I'd like to think that often the white space, everything from line breaks to indentations to gaps, when they work well for me, they're doing more than something visual. And in fact, the visual aspect is negligent. It's the way in which it approximates speech and the hesitations in speech and thought and feeling and the junctures between thoughts that are not necessarily rational or linear. Punctuation is a beautiful tool, and many of my students don't get the beauty, except in the sense that they use it like they throw commas like casting grain. But in fact, punctuation is gorgeous. I hope that's not too pretentious.
Thank you, Eleanor, for that question. So
Yes, thanks, Eleanor.
Well,
Even though you didn't ask me.
I was also thinking about the silences and the gaps as something when language fails.
I think the way a poem, maybe more than other art forms, can use language to show how unsayable certain things are,
Yes.
is one of its great virtues and pleasures.
Yes.
A student of mine finished a poem recently that's about feeling a drug come on, a drug he's injected. And the syntax breaks down at the end. You cannot make sentence sense of the last 4 or 5 lines. And I said to him, Dan, you got it.
Yeah.
By virtue of making it unparsable.
I think there might have been another question. I saw somebody waving their hand earlier.
That was my sister waving goodbye.
Oh.
Hi, Roxanne.
Excellent.
Maybe that's a cue to us.
Is there one last question? Okay. Well, it was a wonderful evening.
I do see a hand up. I'm sorry, but is that just to say goodbye?
I do have one, and I was being shy, but I'll ask it.
Excellent.
I recently lost a dearly beloved pet, many, many years old. And a friend told me that Ken Burns said the half-life of grief is forever, which I thought was just such an incredible thing to think about. And I wondered whether for any of the 3 of you, whether you feel that when you have dealt with grief in a poem, that's just the beginning of all the times you will deal with it later in some way.
Do you want to answer? Do you want to take a stab at that, Tom or Tim?
I could take a very brief stab. Just slightly shifting the arrangement of words to suggest that we are what we have lost. And part of who you are now and going forward is that wonderful animal.
Nancy, I want to just recommend a poem, if you don't know it, by Jane Kenyon called The Blue Bowl, which is about burying, I believe, I'm not a pet person, I believe it's their cat. It is a extraordinarily understated and powerful recording of that event. Jane Kenyon is extraordinary, was extraordinary almost all the time. I'll just say one thing that I don't know if this makes sense. Every decade or so, I write a poem called The Glen. And it is about the same place that as kids, we used to, I believe we even crawled through a culvert to get there. And it was a woods where you could misbehave. So it had that kind of Shakespearean, woodsy feel to it. Every decade, I reapproach that geographical subject and write another poem. There's one in Listen, my new book, and there's one in my 3rd book. I've thrown out most of the others, but that is an example, I think, of being unable to let go of something that's both, you know, in this case, physical and geographical, but also emotional.
Thank you.
I might add too that the accident, she died in 1995, and I didn't even try to write anything about her or the event for over 20 years. So it took quite a long time, I think, for me to feel like I could write about it in a way that I felt good about. But there's a poem in the book that kind of wrestles with this idea of letting go, and in a way, the grief is a way that you remember the person. It's a way they stay with you, and to an extent, you don't want that to end. But I've found through just talking with people and getting to know my mother a little bit more as a person, I'm recognizing that there's a lot that I do without thinking about it that echoes things that she did, and things that ways she moved around the kitchen, or cleaned things, or chewed food, stuff like that, like little things that I'm learning from people, ways that I reflect her. So I just want to, I think about that, and thinking about the ways that you remember anyone you loved, like a pet. There's things that you do now unconsciously without thinking that reflect them, and it's in a way you just kind of are living with them just in the things that you do around the house, around the streets. I'm sorry about that. What happened, and that's kind of what I'm thinking about. So yeah.
Well, thank you all. Thank you, the readers, for that sharing in that space with all of us tonight. It was really profound and touching, and I can see from all the comments, very much appreciated. So good night, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thanks for being part of
Thank you all very much
for sharing this. Thank you.
Lovely evening.
Let's hope we can all meet face to face someday.
Mm-hmm.
Bye-bye.
Good night, all.
Night.